I want to be lean and athletic and squat 600 pounds. That's what a client asked me recently, and I said, let's do it. Can you actually get stronger while losing fat? That's what we're going to discuss in today's podcast. So we're going to be discussing performance nutrition. Whenever I work with trainers and we teach nutrition coaching, we cover general health nutrition, aesthetic nutrition, and performance nutrition, because all three of those areas are all important and they commingle when somebody has a goal. For this goal, the person is mostly going to be looking for performance. It's a sport athlete is the person the client that asked me. They play rugby and they have an athletic background. So they're looking at it from an athletic perspective. So when they say lean, they actually are referring to aesthetic nutrition, which would be nutrition to get somebody to best body composition, like peak body composition, which would be the most amount of muscle mass, the lowest amount of body fat. However, I do typically separate those in the sense to where you can have an aesthetic nutrition athlete who is secondarily focused on performance, and you can have a performance athlete who's secondarily focused on aesthetics. An example of this would be somebody going to get on stage for bodybuilding, male or female. There's tons of different categories for females. But if they're wanting to get on a bodybuilding stage and be super lean, their performance in their workouts absolutely matters. It drives fat loss, drives muscle building, drives all the processes that we want to see happen in the body, all the changes. However, the way they look is ultimately their goal. With this athlete, with performance athletes, their performance is ultimately their main focus. So when he says lean, you might find one performance athlete, maybe what's lean and an optimal leanness in regards to performance, for them might be 16% body fat. For another performance-based athlete, it might be 12% body fat. For another one, it might be 8% body fat. You're trying to find the leanest amount, like the lowest amount of body fat that you can get them to that doesn't compromise performance. That is the little bit of the difference there, nuance-wise, between aesthetic nutrition and performance nutrition. So when I'm focusing on performance nutrition, but we have an aesthetic component, I'm still always going to be considering the aesthetic aspect relative to their performance. So in today's example, I actually want to give an example of a power lifter. However, this would be applicable to sport athletes of all kinds as well. And the power lifter that I was able to do this with, I've done this like helping somebody lose fat and build muscle, bajillions of times. So I've helped people get IFBB Pro Cards, Natural Pro Cards in aesthetics, national world records in powerlifting. I've helped a bunch of different other types of strength sports, strongman, Highland Games, and then tons of professional Olympic and CrossFit Games athletes. So fun, diverse background. So the way we're going to talk about today is any performance athlete who is wanting to lose fat but also still wants to get stronger. How would we manage their nutrition for that? That's what we're going to discuss. So an example of this I have with a powerlifter, they had been competing at the 275-pound weight class, and they were wanting to lower down to the 242 because they weren't filling out the 275. They were actually competing around 270, and it was a soft, kind of punchy 270. It wasn't like they were maxing out that weight class. And although their goal would be eventually, if you'd ask them, would you rather fill out the 275 or lose fat and be mostly competitive at 242, their short-term goal was to get lean enough to be competitive at 242, but then once they're lean, grow back into the 275-pound weight class. So that was our initial thought, is let's drop the fat first. Let's get you to a body fat that's optimal, that you can feel well, you look good, you feel good, and then we'll slowly build the muscle from there. Since that's going to take likely, a couple years, we don't want to be feeling fluffy and fat for a couple years. Let's get that fat off you. Let's have you feel good when you look in the mirror, get on the singlet, and you're, performing on the stage, whatever, or a competition platform. That would be the proper term for powerlifting. So I wanted them to look good and feel good in their skin, and then we'll build the muscle you know, of course we're going to do that, but that's a slower process. So let's do that second. Now for this athlete, we were able to put on a little over 100 pounds on their total, and this took a 10-month process. So they went from 270 pounds to 242. So if my math is correct, that is 28 pounds. I think so. So they dropped 28 pounds and we gained 100 pounds on their total. They went from a 1,500 pound total to like a 1,602. In powerlifting, they use kilograms. However, the majority of the audience that I'm talking to is going to be used to like the American system where it's pounds and ounces and things. So the number is going to be a little bit weird. But we were able to add, I believe it was like 44 pounds on the squat, 22 pounds on the bench, and then whatever the difference was on the deadlift. So that way we got to the 100 pound additional total. So it was really successful. They were super happy. And the 10 months is a time frame that would be a little bit different depending on the person I'm working with, what they were doing leading into the time of us working together. If they were over dieting and they were in a really stressed state, I have to get them to a healthy state first and then start the dieting process. And that was a little bit of what happened with this athlete. They had already been playing around with a lot of things diet-wise, and they just weren't in a great healthy place. So we took the first, I believe it was around 8 weeks. I usually cycle people's training programs on a 4-week rotation. So they'll have the same workouts for 4 weeks. Doesn't mean the same weights. You know, for powerlifting, we might have week 1, we're going to do, I'm just making up numbers, you know, 400 pounds for a 3x3. Then the next week we go to 410. We get, you know, see if we can get 1 set of 3, then maybe a couple sets of 2s. So we do like little weight progressions and stuff for the 4 weeks, but we usually keep the same accessory movements and the same overall movements. We see how they move, how they perform during those 4 weeks, and then we switch the program up and do another 4 weeks. I like that structure because usually the first week they're kind of filling out the movements, figuring things out. It's in a sense sort of a deload. They're going to be trying their absolute best in the exercises. It is going to be max effort, but since they're new movements, new coordination patterns, they're not going to be optimizing like pound for pound exactly what they can do in those movements yet. So week 1 is a little bit of a lower intensity. Week 2, they're now kind of getting like the hang of it. They really know what they're doing. Week 3 and 4, where you're usually overreaching, kind of really pushing to try to make some adaptation. So the following programs, week 1, is kind of a little bit of a recovery from the previous program. So I really like that. I've had clients who've hit, you know, national and world records, and we've never done a deload, or if we do some kind of deload-ish thing, it might be the week after powerlifting meet. So if they compete twice a year, they have 2 deloads a year. So I really like that. It's just my preferred method since I do all of my programming customized, one-on-one. I see the person move in their video reviews. I talk to them. I know how they're feeling. Usually deloads are more necessary when you're getting a generic program that's written for everybody and anybody, and you're just following a pre-scripted program. They don't really know if you're overreaching or not, so they just kind of deload a person, and that gives them a little bit of injury prevention risk, control, and over time the person's going to make progress anyhow. So if they miss a week here or there just to make sure they're not getting injured, it's worth it in a bulk program type of situation. So that was an example of a powerlifter, was super successful. Like I said, it gained over 100 pounds in their total while losing 28 pounds. Awesome job. Done it tons of times with other athletes, but that's an example like where you can hear some of the numbers and kind of puts a story to what we're going to talk about today. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about our basically macronutrient timing. I want to cover the amounts of the macronutrients, the timing, because that is really what separates the ability for someone to be able to do this successfully. Is yes, you do have to track what you're eating per day. That makes a huge difference. That way you don't have large gaps in days where you're under recovering or overstressing the body in the CNS, and you don't have like one day where it's really high, one day where it's really low. Oftentimes people's self-perception of how consistent they are with eating is complete bullshit. I'll tell you this after 26 years of working with clients, over 3,000 clients, people's self-abilities to assess their nutrition is trash, absolute trash. So having some type of caloric control is really helpful. I do prefer that athletes in this situation do count their calories. We count all calories. It's not like, if you eat a chicken breast, you're only going to count the protein out of that. You're not going to count, any like trace fats or whatever. We count everything. And is that going to be 100% accurate? Absolutely not. You know, counting calories isn't 100% accurate. Not all proteins are exactly 4 grams like 4 calories per gram. Not all carbs are 4 calories per gram. Not all fats are 9 calories per gram. But it gives us a tightened sense of control that is controlled enough that we can get the progress we want, we can get some predictability out of our actions, and then that allows us to change our actions to get a predictable outcome. So we do track calories. Usually for calories, I set the calories at first. If I was just starting with somebody out of nowhere, I would go on to calculator.net, use a BMR calculator, put in all their personal information. If I know their body fat percentage or I can estimate it pretty accurately, I'll include that in one of the types of calculations you can choose. There's generic calculations, and then there's one that factors in body fat percentage, so I'll use that one because it's a little bit more accurate. I found out what the BMR is, and then I just consider that to be 0.7% of their necessary total calories in regards to maintenance calories. So once I have that set up, their maintenance calories, then we're going to set up protein to be about 25 to 33% of their total calories. I usually do err on the higher side of that. Sometimes I'll go over 33%, but not always. It's just a little bit better for hunger control, for tissue repair management. It tends to lend itself better, especially the bigger a person is. That tends to go a little bit better when we err more towards the 33% side. Now, fats, it's going to be different per person depending on their tolerance levels. There's quite a bit of variety there. If you're going to look for a percentage, I would say probably around 5 to 10%. I don't usually do really high fat diets, especially for performance athletes. I do include enough fat that they have overall like health, general health related to the health aspects that fats can provide. For example, the powerlifting client, he was eating 100 grams of fat on non-training days, 60 grams of fat on training days. So there's a little bit of a reference for you. So you can see like there, he was over the 10% calories for sure, but he found that that was really good for hunger satiation. So you can play around with that percentage. I mean, I've had clients up to 25%, 20%, 15, 10, you know, you name it. It gets kind of anywhere in there. What I use as fats is just hunger control. Once we set their meal schedule and we put in the protein that we need, and then we're figuring out our total calories, I usually subtract the protein calories from the total calories, and that gives us our energy calories, the calories allocated to carbs and fats, and then the client can distribute that however they want. So if they want to lean into like the non-protein calories, say they want that 50-50, that's fine. If they want it 60-40, 70-30, whatever, I don't care. We usually will change what percentage of fats versus carbs are in the non-protein calories based on the timing of that meal. So that's really why timing starts to matter. Is if we look at the macronutrients, how we break the timing down. Protein, we want to be peaked post-workout. And then I usually start to kind of taper that off. Usually the highest spots of protein is going to be post-workout and before bed. If somebody trains in the evening, those kind of coincide. They're the same meal pretty much. If somebody trains in the morning, we usually will spike protein after the workout, dip it a little bit during the day, and then have a good amount right before bed. If they work out midday, it's start a little bit low, spike after the workout, a little bit low at dinner, then high again before bed. The reason why is if they're going to be sleeping, they're going to be going about 6 to 8 hours without food. So we want to intake a lot of protein right before bed. So their body's working and putting all that protein to use and getting the repairs that we need. And post-workout, just because we're damaged and beat up, that's when the body's going to be very highly responsive to protein. When I was doing my master's in nutrition, my thesis was a 50-page paper with 200 peer-reviewed research articles on the anabolic window. So I got to find out how really important it was getting protein like 20, 40, 60 minutes post-workout, you know, kind of compare those time frames. And then was it better to be protein alone or protein paired with carbohydrates? So the end-all outcome was that protein after your workout at any time frame is great. If you have it the sooner after the workout, slightly better, but not overly significantly better. Just make sure you get it in. And if you pair it with simple carbohydrates, it does help the protein digest a little bit faster. So there you go. Essentially what I took away from it is the anabolic window is considered, if you think of the general question, is it important to get protein in after your workout? Yes. So that was it. That was my major takeaway. I wish it was more nuanced than that. Sadly, it was worth spending all that time researching it. But I like that it's not overly nuanced, because then it just makes it more easy to manage. If you train at the beginning of the day, midday, you still have a lot of stuff going on around your life. So trying to get in, the exact amount of protein, the exact type of right source with the exact right carbohydrate can be more challenging. So knowing that there's leeway with those components is helpful. So protein, that's really the timing we're looking for, is spiked post-workout and before bed. Sometimes those coincide. For fats, we're really just looking at what can help control hunger levels. Usually, we're just going to drop fats out of the post-workout window. The post-workout meal, we're going to focus mostly on proteins and carbs. It's going to be lean proteins, so therefore no fats, and relatively quick digesting carbs. It depends on the state of the person. Sometimes we'll do, it doesn't have, we don't necessarily want sugars, because that might contribute to a significant amount of calories that they're going to have during that day, but that's not a very satiating meal, so they're going to be super hungry and maybe have cravings and have issues later on in the day. So the complexity of the carbohydrates also depends on the total calorie count for the person and when that meal is. But that's essentially what we're looking for fats, is we're just saying, okay, I want to have enough at each meal that I'm not ravenous by the time I get to my next meal, but not so much at each meal that I'm not hungry by the time I get to my next meal. So just enough to control hunger depending on your meal timing. And then we want to drop that out post-workout. Carbohydrates is what I modify the most, because it allows us to play with our caloric deficit on a daily basis. In general, we want to have carbohydrates kind of leading into the workout, carbohydrates right after the workout, and then I usually taper that down, and we lean more into like fruits and vegetables type sources at the meals away from workouts. At times of workouts, it depends on the person. Sometimes we'll use like a cereal. Sometimes we use cream of rice or regular rice. We use potatoes, pasta, oats, whatever the person likes. It's more of the complex type carbohydrates, but we will have some faster digesting type of carbohydrates, which would be like cereals, for example. We might have that pre and or post workout. Again, it depends on the person's timing, their meal timing. If they're trying to fit in 2 meals early before training, midday, we might want to have one of those meals, like the meal right before training, be more of a cereal, something they can eat that's easier on the stomach, lighter on the stomach. If somebody has a big, heavy breakfast, that might carry them into training. And then right after training, we might do a cereal with whey protein mixed in the milk. So that way it's real fast digesting, since they had a long gap since that meal in the beginning of the day. So really everything's customized to the person's meal timing and their preference for what foods they want. Some clients, for example, if they eat the cereal, they feel like they get a reward, and then they're easier to be more precise and tight on their food choice with other meals. Whereas some clients, if they have something that feels like a cheat or a fun meal, they can kind of like be a little bit loose on their other meals. So they would have like a cereal post-workout, and they're like, oh, that was really good. That went down so fast. Now I'm kind of like realizing that I'm pretty hungry. There's a little sweet treat over here. Maybe I'll snack on that. I'm prepping some kids' snacks. Maybe I'll eat an Oreo or 2, and that doesn't have to count because it's only 1. So they might lose control if we do something too sweet or too easy or too satiating, like where it's like, oh, that tastes good. So we have to have a little more bland, a little more slower digesting foods for them. So I like this because in this podcast, you can hear how much of everything is customized for the person, but there are still like commonalities. Protein being spiked post-workout before bed. But then for each person, when do they work out? And that determines when this meal happens. And then what are their favorite protein sources? So for myself right now, I'm doing Greek yogurt with a non-sugar, like a sugar-free kind of coffee syrup to sweeten the yogurt. And I'm putting in frozen blueberries. And that I really like post-workout. It's a heavy meal for me. It gets in a little bit of simple sugars, a good amount of protein, and I can eat that, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that felt good. My body has what it needs, and I can go a couple hours before I would even start to think of another meal. Whereas that's like preferential for me. My pre-workout is often chicken and rice. Sometimes I'll have cream of rice if I have a little bit of a faster turnaround. And like for example, most often I'll train midday. So I might wake up in the morning, have my chicken and rice. That's going to take 2 to 3 hours for me to feel like comfortable. I'll then down some caffeine, get into my workout, have the Greek yogurt, blueberries after the workout, and then I can kind of play around with the rest of the meals during the day or the evening. But that is a structure for me that works really well. But I have other clients who do a million other things. You know, they might have eggs and a bagel for breakfast. They might, like I said, have cereal with whey protein mixed in the milk post-workout, where I like the Greek yogurt. I like a heavier thing after the workout, where somebody else might want a lighter thing because heavy things make their stomach upset. So I like it. I love it, knowing that there's a million ways to get to these concepts. So the protein we said was high post-workout before bed. Fats we want evenly throughout the day, but definitely not right after workout, but even in the other meals, enough to control our hunger to make sure we're hungry for the next meal, but not over full. And then carbohydrates we play with. You know, non-training day, we might bring the carbohydrates down quite a bit, and that will push with fat loss. Training day, we're going to bring that up a little bit, maybe give them some energy, or we might find that on training days, they don't like a lot of food volume, so that might actually be kind of a moderate to low day. And then the next day, we might fill up their carbohydrates leading throughout that day, leading into the next day's workout. So if they train on a Monday and Wednesday, maybe on Tuesday, we start the day with low carbs, but we build the carbs throughout the day, so that way their glycogen stores are full leading into a Wednesday morning workout. So if they work out in the morning, we're going to fill the night before. Whereas if they work out in the evening, we're going to fill during the day. So it really depends on workout timing. Will also depend on how we kind of wave their carbohydrates, since that's essentially the gas in the gas tank. That's the fuel that we're going to be using primarily for their workouts. Now, overall, this type of structure works really well. Now, how we manage progress is we do track body weight if the person has a body weight related goal. A powerlifter, if they want to go from the 275 class to a 242, we do go to track body weight. If somebody just wants to look better, feel better, we don't need to track body weight. We might use body composition photos. So maybe I'll have them send me photos every 2 weeks. They try on the same pair of shorts, the same t-shirt. How does that feel? How does that fit? We look for new lines, new shapes coming out in the photos. So maybe we might use just photos to kind of track our physical progress. Whereas with other athletes, we might use photos plus body weight. It just kind of depends on what their sport is. And then we also track lift quality. So for all my clients, I watch their lifts when they send me videos. I can see how they're moving. If they're moving well, then we know we're on track. If they look sluggish and normal weights just kind of look a little slow, I know that maybe I need to bump up their carbohydrates for a day or two, let them catch up a little bit. They'll report feeling a little better. The lifts will look a little faster, and then I start pulling the carbs down again. So that's, I use video quality of their movement, like videos for their movement quality. I use that quite a bit to see how they're moving. And then also just self-reported daily energy and workout recovery. You know, I'm like, hey, is anything bugging you? They may be like, yeah, like something in my elbow is kind of bugging me, but you know, this was kind of the first day I noticed it. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, so I'll make sure that's in my mind. I'm aware of it. But if it becomes like, oh, yeah, my elbow is bugging me again, like it was bugging me last week, it bugged me again this week, and it's just really not recovering well, then we know we got to bump our calories up to start to give the body a little extra something to work with to repair whatever that issue is. So I use those components to manage the carbohydrate intake, which then helps me manage the degree or depth of deficit that I have the person using in order to drive the fat loss that we want. So that is how we balance performance and fat loss. You can absolutely 100% get stronger, get faster, get more explosive, whatever the heck the thing is that you want to get better at performance-wise while losing body fat. It does require that you track what you do. So yes, you have to actually track what you do. It does help. The more precise we are with what we're doing, the more precise of outcome we can create. So we do want to track our calories. Like I said, protein is going to be around 25 to 33% of total calories. We're probably going to lean up more towards that 33%. And that's spiked post-workout before bed. Fats is even throughout the day except for the meal right after workout, and it's just to control hunger from meal to meal. And then carbohydrates are really what we vary. We want it higher leading into the workout and post-workout, drop it back down when we're away from the workouts, and then you vary the height and intensity of those waves based on how the person's body weight is changing, how their composition is changing, how their lifts are moving, and how they're feeling in daily recovery and workout recovery. Okay. So I think that was everything. A lot of really fun stuff there. If you have any questions, let me know. I obviously do one-on-one coaching, so you can check out our website, www.c3method.com. The 3 is spelled out T-H-R-E-E, so C-T-H-R-E-E method.com. You can sign up to one-on-one coaching, or you can sign up to do the nutrition coaching system. Like we do teach other personal trainers how to do nutrition coaching. So if you want to learn how to get certified for nutrition coaching, you can hit us up on the website as well. Okay, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, reach out on the 1 million different platforms there are. I'll get some kind of notification, and I promise I'll respond. You can also send us a message on the website. That's a pretty good way to make sure I'm going to get it as well. Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful. There you go. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.